Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. And as you can see, I'm down at the beach again. It's an absolute scorcher today. There's not many people here yet, but it is quite early. And the reason I want to make this video is to talk to you about what's going on in Bangladesh. Now, if you've been following the channel, you'll know that around 12-18 months ago, there were major problems in Bangladesh. However, all of those seem to be sorted when in December 2023, they agreed with the IMF a $4.7 billion bailout. So that looked like it had solved all of Bangladesh's problems. However, over the last month or so, there have been a lot of protests, and those protests have unfortunately now turned deadly. And it's been reported that over 100 people have been killed and thousands have been injured. And the reason that everybody is protesting is because the government, which is actually re-elected recently for its 4th consecutive term, so we've got a very stable political environment. We haven't had a change of government. But what we have seen in Bangladesh is the reintroduction of quotas for government jobs. Now, this is something that dates back to the Bangladesh independence in 1971, when it got its independence from Pakistan. And at that time, the newly formed government introduced quotas whereby families of people who were fighting for Bangladeshi independence were offered 56% of all of the government jobs. Now, over the last 50 years or so, that 56% was actually reduced back to 30%, but it still remained at 30% up until 2018, when it was scrapped entirely, when they decided that the period for thanking everybody for the independence fighting was over and that everybody would be given a fair crack at getting a government job. However, those quotas were recently reinstated, and that's caused major problems because at the moment in Bangladesh, the economy is not doing well. Despite the fact that it had a bailout in December from the IMF, that hasn't magically solved all of the fundamental problems. So we've got high levels of youth unemployment. It's been reported that 32 million people under the age of 25 are unemployed out of a population of 170 million. So that's a serious problem. And the students are very unhappy that 30% of the government jobs are being pre-allocated to families from the revolutionary fighting groups. And the reason that they're unhappy is that the private sector in Bangladesh is currently struggling. So there aren't as many newly created jobs in the private sector. So government created jobs are more important. And people who are studying at university want to be able to get those jobs. And so they came out and started protesting. But unfortunately, the government of Pakistan decided that they needed to bring the military in to try to bring peace to the streets. The military initially started firing rubber bullets and tear gas, and unfortunately violence erupted, and we've now seen these deaths. And as a result of this, the government have now introduced a total curfew. Everybody has to stay in their houses, and they've switched off the internet and stopped all text messaging. So basically what they're trying to do is cut out all social media and contact to stop people arranging more protests and gatherings.
Soldiers patrolled the streets of Dhaka on Saturday as the army imposed a curfew in Bangladesh. The government wants to quell student-led protests that have become increasingly violent and deadly over recent days. Since Thursday, the country has been cut off from the world. Internet and text messaging services have been shut down. But the demonstrations have continued in spite of a ban on public gatherings. Data from hospitals there shows the clashes have killed over 100 people and injured thousands. And with the death toll climbing, the government imposed the national curfew and deployed the military.
Roadblocks and running battles. Students protesting across Bangladesh, angry at the reinstatement of a quota system for government jobs. Students had been rallying on university campuses for weeks, but the demonstrations turned violent on Monday when confrontations broke out.
We came here in the morning. Soon after that, police and members of the ruling party's student wing started to attack us. 2 students have been shot in front of me, and we took them to the hospitals.
The government has shut all public and private universities and sent security forces onto campuses. The nationwide unrest is fueled by mass unemployment among a young generation struggling to find work in the country of 170 million people.
So as it stands at the moment, all protests are now banned in Pakistan up until Sunday, and they've allowed a 2-hour window over the weekend for people to be able to go out between 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. to go out and get some shopping and provisions. So this is basically a complete lockdown, a military curfew. And it'll be interesting to see what happens at the end of the weekend, whether or not Bangladesh lifts those restrictions, because if it does, it's highly likely that the students will want to gather again and protest further, because the position hasn't been solved. The fact that they've introduced a military lockdown doesn't solve the issue of 30% of the government jobs being pre-allocated to families that were involved in the revolution back in 1971. So I think we've got a really interesting situation brewing here, and all of this really links back to the fact that Bangladesh is in a severe economic crisis. Although they've had 4.7 million given to them by the IMF, not all of that has been drawn down, because the IMF deals always come with terms and conditions. It's basically a loan that will need to be paid back by Bangladesh at some point in the future. And if you don't meet all of those terms and conditions, you can't draw down all of the capital. So although the headline news, when you read it in the mainstream media, says Bangladesh has been given $4.7 billion, and now you think that that solves the problem, actually it gets drip fed into the economy, and only if you introduce reforms and certain conditions that, generally speaking, are penal for the people who live there. So you want to see, broadly speaking, taxes increasing and basically the government earning more revenue so that it can get back onto a stable footing and become more self-sufficient. So obviously none of that has happened. These things don't fix themselves overnight. So the fact that Bangladesh has been given a bailout opportunity by the IMF doesn't fix the fundamental problems in the economy. And that's basically what the students are rebelling over. They're saying that there's a lack of jobs in Bangladesh right now, and they want the opportunity to apply for every single job that's available. They don't want some of these jobs being pre-allocated to what they see as families that are being treated preferentially. So the situation right now is not good in Bangladesh. We've got a lockdown in terms of all of the people. We've got people who are extremely unhappy about the economic situation and the fact that there are no jobs. We've got rising unemployment, and we've got a lack of dollars. That's one of the fundamental problems that Bangladesh has been struggling from. It's a net importer, and it has to buy lots of things. Most of those things are priced in US dollars and have to be paid for in dollars. And the reserves have been running down, and that's why they got to a state of crisis around 12-18 months ago. So the problems in Bangladesh haven't been fixed. We've had a cash injection from the IMF that hasn't been fully released yet, that hasn't solved all of the fundamental issues which still remain. And so this is one of the reasons why I want to post these videos, just to remind you that although you may read in the press that Bangladesh has had a bailout from the IMF and everything looks good, that actually doesn't solve all of the issues. Sometimes it's just a sticking plaster that goes over the cracks. It doesn't solve the problems, and unless you can turn your economy around, create more jobs, create more income, create more dollars to be able to buy things in, it's going to struggle in the long term, and that's what's happening in Bangladesh right now. And the students, which is generally speaking where most protests start, when you look at revolutions all across the world, it generally starts with student protests, which then potentially boil over into violence, and then you may see some sort of civil unrest spreading to the rest of the country. I don't know whether that's going to happen in Bangladesh, but there's certainly a possibility, because there are fundamental problems happening in Bangladesh right now, and until they're solved, you're going to have a lot of people that are very unhappy. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. I wanted to bring you down to the beach again. Let's have a little bit of a walk around and just have a look at what's going on here. It's pretty quiet down the beach. Not many people around, quite early at the moment. There's a few people walking on the boardwalk behind me. The weather is so hot today, so definitely some time for sunscreen. Stay protected, which is what I'm going to do. Got a little bit burnt yesterday, unfortunately, so I may well keep my t-shirt on today. But hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. You've liked seeing me down the beach. Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again soon on the next video.
Front runner at the moment is the Shadow Housing Secretary, Penny